2 years after the betrayal, humanity had built something new. And Admiral Yuna Seong stood on the observation deck of the newly completed Harmony Station, watching the stars that had once rejected her people. Earth space had expanded in those 2 years. New colonies established in regions the Concordat had never bothered to explore. New alliances formed with species who existed outside the great galactic government. Humanity had not faded away as the Core 3 had hoped, had not collapsed into irrelevance without access to Concordat markets and technology. Instead, they had thrived, building a civilization that depended on no one but themselves, proving that the qualities that had made them essential to the galaxy were not diminished by exile. "Admiral," Lieutenant Beak said from behind her, "sensors are detecting ships approaching our border. They appear to be refugees from the outer Concordat territories." "How many?" 47 vessels, mostly civilian transports. "They are requesting asylum." Seong closed her eyes and thought about the oath she had sworn when she first put on this uniform. The promise to protect those who could not protect themselves, regardless of where they came from. "Let them through," she ordered. "Give them food and medical care and shelter. We will figure out the rest later." "Yes." "Admiral," this had become routine in the past year. Ships arriving at the border, carrying refugees from the chaos that was consuming Concordat space. Species who had nowhere else to turn when their own governments failed them. Humanity had accepted them all. Drexarian, Mothan, and Yulvari, and dozens of others, giving them the same help that humans had once given freely when they were part of the Alliance. Some in the government had argued against this policy, had demanded that humanity turn away the very species who had voted to condemn them, but General Chai had overruled them with words. That had become something of a motto for the new human civilization. "We do not help them because they deserve it," he had said. "We help them because this is who we are. This is who we have always been. And we will not let their betrayal change us into something less." On a Corthoric colony world 300 light years from Earth, a massive earthquake had devastated the capital city, and rescue teams struggled to pull survivors from the rubble while their government debated what to do. The Concordat relief systems had collapsed months ago, victims of the chaos that had followed humanity's departure, and no one seemed to know how to respond to disasters anymore. Elder Mithrin stood in the ruins of his childhood home, watching volunteers dig through the debris, and he wondered how many of his people would die before help arrived. Then he heard a sound that made his heart stop. Human ships descending through the atmosphere, their hulls marked with the Red Cross symbol that every species in the galaxy recognized as the sign of medical aid. Impossible. He thought, "They cannot be here. They would never help us after what we did." But the ships landed anyway, and human crews poured out, carrying equipment and supplies, setting up field hospitals and search teams with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this 1,000 times before. A human woman approached Mithrin with calm authority in her eyes, her uniform marking her as the leader of the relief mission. "I am Dr. Hannah Zheng," she said. "We detected the seismic event from our monitoring stations and came as quickly as we could." "Why?" Mithrin asked, and his voice broke on the word. "Why would you help us?" "My people betrayed yours." Dr. Zheng looked at him for a long moment, and something in her expression made him think of the human teachers he had loved so much as a young student. "Because there are children buried under that rubble," she said simply, "and children do not deserve to die for the choices of their leaders." She walked past him toward the ruins, already calling out orders to her team, and Mithrin watched her go with tears streaming down his scaled face. A recorded message began to play from the human ships, a voice that Mithrin recognized as belonging to Admiral Seong. "This aid is provided by the people of Earth without conditions or expectations. We do not come seeking reconciliation or forgiveness. We come because help is needed and we are able to give it. Because this is who we are. This is who we have always been." And no betrayal will ever change that. The message ended. But its words echoed in Mithrin's hearts long after the last syllable had faded on. Earth Ambassador Jinho Park sat in a garden he had planted after his retirement, watching flowers bloom in colors that reminded him of distant worlds he would never see again. Young human child ran through the garden chasing butterflies, her laughter bright and pure in the afternoon air. And Park smiled at the simple joy of the moment. "Ambassador Park," the child called out, stopping beside his bench. "Can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Little one, my teacher says you used to live with the aliens before they sent us away. That is true." The child's face grew serious, her eyes old beyond her years, in the way that children's eyes sometimes became when they were thinking about difficult things. "Are you sad about what happened?" Park considered the question carefully, turning it over in his mind the way he had once turned over diplomatic proposals from a dozen species. "I am sad that we were betrayed," he finally said. "Sad that people I trusted chose fear over friendship. But I am proud of what we did. And what we are still doing." "What do you mean?" Park gestured at the sky above them, at the stars that were just beginning to appear in the fading light. "Out there, right now, human ships are delivering aid to species that voted to condemn us. Human doctors are saving lives on worlds that tried to destroy us. Human volunteers are rebuilding cities that belong to governments that declared us enemies. Why do we do that if they were mean to us? Because being kind to others should not depend on whether they are kind to us," Park said. "Because the measure of who we are is not how we treat our friends, but how we treat those who have wronged us." The child thought about this for a moment, her small face scrunched up with concentration. "That seems really hard." "It is," Park agreed. "It is the hardest thing in the universe, but it is also the most important." In the Concordat Council chamber, a delegation of 12 species had gathered to discuss something that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. They were not here representing the Concordat. That institution was a shadow of its former self. Barely functional and increasingly irrelevant, they were here representing themselves. Species who had seen the truth about humanity's betrayal and wanted to make things right. "We have prepared a formal acknowledgement of what was done," the Drexari delegate said. "A statement accepting that the evidence against humanity was fabricated, and that we were wrong to believe it. We are also prepared to offer reparations," added the Modern representative. "Compensation for the lives lost and the suffering caused." High Armada Zorvan, who had clung to power despite everything, shook his head. "The humans will never accept. They have made it clear they want nothing to do with us." "Perhaps," said a voice from the back of the chamber, and everyone turned to see Mithrin walking forward with a datapad in his hands. "But we will never know unless we try. You have no authority here." "Mithrin, I have the authority of truth," the young Korthri replied. "Which is more than you have ever had." He activated the datapad, and a recording began to play. A recording from the human relief mission that had saved his colony just weeks before Dr. Jing's voice filled the chamber, explaining to a group of Korthri children why humans had come to help them. "We are not your enemies," she said in the recording. "We were never your enemies. We were your friends who got hurt very badly by people we trusted. But being hurt does not mean we stop caring about others. Being betrayed does not mean we stop believing in kindness. Your leaders made a terrible choice, and many people suffered because of it, but you are not your leaders. You are children who deserve a chance to grow up in a galaxy where people help each other instead of hurting each other. So we came, not because you asked, not because anyone told us to, but because someone has to show the galaxy what it looks like when people choose compassion over revenge." The recording ended, and silence filled the chamber. Mithrin looked around at the assembled delegates, at the faces of beings who had participated in one of the greatest betrayals in galactic history. "The humans have already shown us the path forward," he said. They have shown us that strength is not measured in weapons or territory, but in the ability to remain true to who you are, even when the universe gives you every reason to become something worse. We can never undo what was done, but we can become the species that humanity always believed we could be. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried across the chamber like a prayer. We can become worthy of their forgiveness, even if they never give it. On the border of human space, General Doan Chai stood before a delegation from the 12 species, listening to their offer of acknowledgement and reconciliation. "We will never return to what was," he said finally. "We will never trust as we trusted before." The delegates nodded, accepting this truth that could not be changed. "But we are willing to build something new," Chai continued. "Something where humanity's worth is never questioned, where our friendship is never taken for granted. We accept those terms." The Drexari delegate said, "We accept any terms you offer, because we have learned that a galaxy without humanity is not a galaxy worth living in." Chai turned to look at Admiral Siong. 6 months after the last human ship crossed the border, Councillor Vethro stood in the Great Hall of the Concordat Council and watched his government tear itself apart. The Drexari ambassador was screaming at the modern representative, their translators struggling to keep up with the rapid exchange of accusations and insults. And no one could calm them down, because there were no human mediators left to bridge the gap between their incompatible communication styles. "This is unacceptable," High Arbiter Zorvan declared from his elevated seat. "We must have order in this chamber. Then bring back the humans who kept order." The Yulvari delegate shouted, "Oh wait, you cannot, because you drove them away with your lies." Vethral closed his eyes and tried to remember the last time he had seen the council function properly. And he realized with a sick feeling in his stomach that it had been before the humans left. Everything had worked so smoothly when humanity was here. So smoothly that no one had noticed how much they depended on human skills until those skills were gone. The communication relays were failing because no one understood the human-designed systems well enough to repair them. And species that had talked freely for decades were now struggling to understand each other through broken and unreliable translation software. Trade networks were collapsing because human merchants had been the trusted intermediaries between species who would never deal with each other directly. And markets that had thrived for 40 years were now withering as goods stopped moving between worlds. 3 border disputes had escalated to the brink of war in the past month alone. Conflicts that would have been resolved in hours by human diplomats now, festering into wounds that threatened to tear the Concordat apart. And the plague withdrawal shuddered when he thought about the plague that was spreading through the outer colonies, a disease that human doctors had contained a dozen times before, but that now ran unchecked because no one else knew how to stop it. Councillor Vethrol, High Arbiter Zorvan called out, "Do you have anything to add to this discussion?" Vethrol opened his eyes and looked around the chamber at the chaos that had become normal in these meetings. And he thought about the data chip that Ambassador Park had given him 6 months ago. He had finally reviewed its contents last night, and what he found there had kept him awake until dawn. "I have something to share with the council," he said, and his voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Something I should have shared months ago." The chamber fell silent as Vethrol walked to the central display and inserted the data chip. And then the records began to play 847 times. Humanity had provided emergency aid to Concordat worlds. Food and medicine and rescue teams sent without hesitation whenever disaster struck. 12 wars prevented by human mediators who had spent months or years patiently building trust between species who had been enemies for centuries. 23 species saved from extinction by human intervention. Entire civilizations that existed today only because humans had cared enough to help them survive. diseases cured, famines ended, refugees rescued, children educated. Technologies shared freely, without expectation of profit or advantage. The records went on and on. A testament to 40 years of service that asked nothing in return, except the chance to be part of the galactic community. And at the end, just as Ambassador Park had said, there was a question: was it worth it? The chamber was silent when the recording ended, and Vethrol turned to face his colleagues with shame burning in his hearts. "We betrayed them," he said simply. "We betrayed the best friends this Concordat has ever had. And we did it because we were afraid of how much better they were at everything than we were." "The evidence," High Arbiter Zorvan began. "The evidence was fabricated," Vethrol interrupted. "We all knew it was fabricated. We chose to believe it because it was easier than admitting that humanity had become essential to our survival. You cannot prove—" "I do not need to prove anything," Vethrol said. And now his voice was rising with an anger he had kept buried for too long. "Look around you. Look at what has become of us in just 6 months without them." He gestured at the chamber, at the arguing delegates and the broken translation systems and the flickering lights that no one could repair. "We are falling apart. All of us, because we cut out the heart of our civilization and expected to survive without it." On the Core 3 homeworld, Elder Sithax sat in his private chambers and listened to reports of the chaos spreading across Concordat space. And he felt something he had not felt in a very long time: regret. He had been the architect of humanity's betrayal, the one who had fabricated the evidence and convinced the Council to act. And he had done it all to protect Core 3 influence in the galaxy. Humans were growing too powerful, too beloved, too essential. And Sithax had feared that his people would become irrelevant if humanity's rise continued unchecked, so he had destroyed them. Or tried to, and in doing so, he had destroyed everything his people had built over centuries of careful diplomacy. The Core 3 economy was collapsing because human trade networks had been their primary connection to the galactic market. And without those networks, their goods rotted in warehouses. While their factories fell silent, other species were turning against them as the truth about the fabricated evidence began to spread. And alliances that had lasted generations were crumbling into suspicion and hostility. His own people were calling for his head, demanding to know why he had sacrificed everything for nothing, why he had murdered their greatest friendship for the sake of pride that now seemed hollow and foolish. Young Core 3 named Mithrin had become the leader of this movement. A brilliant scholar who had studied under human teachers and learned to see the galaxy through human eyes. Mithrin was calling for full accountability, for the truth to be broadcast to every species, for the Core 3 to admit what they had done and beg humanity for forgiveness. Sithax had tried to silence him, but the young fool had too many supporters. And every day more, Core 3 joined his cause. "Elder Sithax," his assistant said from the doorway, "there is news from the border." "What news?" "The Concordat has sent a diplomatic mission to Earth space, requesting talks with the human government." Sithax felt a flicker of hope in his ancient chest. "And the humans? How did they respond?" The assistant hesitated, and that hesitation told Sithax everything he needed to know. "They refused, Elder. The message said that humanity is not accepting communications from the Concordat at this time." The hope died as quickly as it had been born, and Sithax sank deeper into his chair as the weight of his choices pressed down upon him. Had gambled everything on the belief that humanity would fade away quietly once they were expelled from the Concordat, that the galaxy would forget them and move on instead. Humanity had become more visible than ever, a wound that would not heal, a reminder of what the galaxy had lost through fear and jealousy and lies. And the worst part was that Sithax knew he deserved every moment of suffering that was coming his way. He had betrayed the only species in the galaxy that had truly understood the meaning of friendship. And now he would spend whatever remained of his life watching everything he had built crumble to dust. Counselor Vethral returned to his quarters after the council session and found Mithrin waiting for him. The young courtier's scales bright with the passion of youth and conviction. "Counselor," Mithrin said, "I saw your presentation today. It was brave of you to share the truth. It was not brave. It was 6 months too late, perhaps, but it is a beginning. We can still make this right." Vethral looked at the young idealist and wished he could share his optimism, but he had seen too much, done too much, to believe in easy redemption. "The humans will not forgive us, Mithrin. They may never forgive us. Then we must earn their forgiveness. However long it takes. And how do you propose we do that?" Mithrin's eyes burned with a fire that reminded Vethral of the human diplomats he had once known. The ones who had believed so fiercely in the possibility of a better galaxy, by being the species they thought we were. Mithrin said, "By becoming worthy of the friendship we threw away." Vethral thought about those words long after Mithrin had gone. And somewhere deep in his heart, a tiny flame of hope began to flicker. It would take generations to repair what had been broken. If it could be repaired at all, but perhaps that was the lesson humanity had left behind. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible, and some betrayals are so terrible that the only path forward is through the long, slow work of becoming someone who would never have committed them in the first place. Lieutenant Yunji Beek had joined Admiral Xiang's fleet because she believed in the dream of galactic cooperation. And now she sat at her communications console preparing to send the most important message of her life. "All channels are open?" "Admiral," she reported, keeping her voice steady even though her hands wanted to tremble. Admiral Xiang stood at the center of the bridge, watching the endless stream of ships passing through the checkpoint at the border of Concordat space. For 3 months they had been evacuating human citizens, and now the last of them were finally coming home. "Begin transmission." Xiang ordered Beek, activated the broadcast system, and watched as the Admiral's words went out to every human in the galaxy. "This is Admiral Yuna Xiang of the Earth Defense Fleet. The evacuation of Concordat space is now complete. All human citizens have been returned to Earth territory or are en route." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a weight that seemed to press down on the very stars themselves. "For 40 years we gave everything we had to the Galactic Concordat. We shared our technology and our medicine. We mediated disputes and prevented wars. We asked for nothing in return except friendship and the chance to be part of something greater than ourselves. The Concordat has answered our friendship with betrayal. They have accepted lies over truth, fear over trust, and they have shown us that we were never truly welcome among them. So now we go home, not in defeat but in dignity, not in anger but in sorrow. And we take with us everything we brought to this alliance. Let the galaxy see what it has lost. Let them understand what they threw away. And let them remember that this was their choice, not ours." The transmission ended, and silence fell over the bridge as the weight of those words settled into the hearts of everyone who heard them. Merchant Captain Sumanan was one of the last humans to leave Concordat space, and her cargo holds were full of things that could never be replaced. She had spent 20 years building a trade network that connected species who would never have dealt with each other directly. And now she was taking all of that knowledge with her. Drexery had no idea how to negotiate with the modern without a human intermediary. The Yulvari had never learned how to read Corthery body language. The dozens of smaller species who depended on human traders for rare goods had no alternative. Supplersiman had tried to teach her alien partners the basics of what she did. But 20 years of experience could not be passed on in 3 months of hasty lessons. "Captain," her navigator said, "we are approaching the border checkpoint." "Take us through slowly," Suman replied. "I want them to see us leaving." Her ship passed through the checkpoint where Concordat vessels watched in silence. And as she crossed into human space, she allowed herself one final look back at the stars she had called home for 2 decades. Goodbye, she whispered to no one in particular in the diplomatic sector of the Concordat Station. Ambassador Yunho Park prepared to leave the embassy he had built from nothing 40 years ago. The walls were bare now, stripped of the artwork and photographs that had made this place feel like home. And the silence echoed in rooms that had once been full of laughter and debate and the sound of different species learning to understand each other. Counselor Vethril came to see him off, and the Core 3 diplomat looked older than Park remembered, as if the last 3 months had aged him decades. Ambassador, Vethril said, I wanted to speak with you before you left. There is nothing left to say, Park replied. But he did not move toward the door. I know you believe we made a mistake. I know you did, Park said. And his voice held no anger, only a deep and terrible sadness. The evidence against us was fabricated. You know this as well as I do. The council reviewed the evidence and found it credible. The council saw what they wanted to see. They were afraid of humanity's growing influence, and they jumped at the chance to cut us down. Vethril was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Some of us tried to argue for investigation, for patience, for the benefit of the doubt, but not enough of you. No, not enough. Park reached into his bag and pulled out a small data chip, which he pressed into the Core 3's scaled hand. This contains records of every contribution humanity made to this alliance over the past 40 years, he said. Every life we saved, every war we prevented, every disease we cured, every famine we ended. Vethril looked at the chip as if it might burn him. Why give this to me? So you remember. So when the consequences of your choice become clear, you will know exactly what you threw away. Park picked up his bag and walked toward the door. But he stopped at the threshold and looked back one final time. We trusted you. Counselor, we trusted all of you, and you repaid that trust with betrayal. Ambassador. There was a question at the end of that data file, Park interrupted. A simple question that I want you to think about in the days and months and years to come. What question? Park's eyes met the Core 3's. And in that moment, Vethril saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Was it worth it? The ambassador walked away, and behind him the empty embassy seemed to echo with the ghosts of 40 years of friendship that had been murdered by fear and jealousy. Admiral Xiong watched on her sensors as the last human ship crossed the border into Earth space, and she felt something inside her chest finally begin to loosen. All personnel accounted for, Lieutenant Beak reported. The evacuation is complete. Casualties: 412 dead during the initial roundup. Another 106 who died in detention. 17 ships destroyed. 518 human beings who would never see their families again, who had died because the galaxy had chosen to believe lies over the truth of 40 years of friendship. Send a final message to Concordat Command. Xiong ordered. What should it say? Admiral. Xiong thought for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was cold and hard as the void between stars. Tell them that humanity thanks the Concordat for their hospitality over the past 40 years. Tell them that we wish them well in the future, and tell them that we will not be accepting communications from Concordat space until further notice. Beak's fingers moved across her console, and the message went out into the black. It is done, Admiral. Then take us home, Lieutenant. Our people are waiting. The flagship turned away from the border and began the long journey back to Earth. And behind them, the stars of Concordat space grew smaller and fainter until they were just another patch of light in an infinite sky. General Chai was waiting for them when they arrived, standing on the observation deck of Earth Station 1 with a crowd of civilians who had come to welcome the fleet home. Admiral, he said as Xiong stepped off the shuttle. You have done well. We brought everyone home, sir. Everyone who survived. And the Concordat. Silent. They have not attempted to contact us since my final message. General Chai nodded slowly, and something in his old eyes looked almost satisfied. Good. Let them have their silence. Let them think they have won. Let them believe that humanity has retreated in defeat. And what happens now? General, Chai turned to look out at the stars. At the vast darkness that humanity had once crossed with such hope and wonder. Now we wait. Now we watch. Now we build our own civilization without them. And now they learn what it truly means to lose humanity. He paused. And when he spoke again, his voice was soft enough that only Xiang could hear. They wanted us gone, Admiral, so we went. But I wonder if they truly understood what they were asking for. Xiang followed his gaze out into the black, thinking of all the worlds she had visited, all the friends she had made, all the good that humanity had done during their 40 years among the stars. They will learn soon enough. General, yes, Chai agreed. They will, and somewhere in the darkness between Earth and the Concordat border, the first cracks were already beginning to form in a galactic civilization that had just cut out its own heart. Captain Myra Yoon had never felt fear like this before, and she had faced pirates and radiation storms and engine failures that should have killed her crew a dozen times. Overbut, watching Core-3 warships surround her research vessel, made her hands shake in a way that no natural disaster ever had. Captain, her first officer said with panic in his voice, they are demanding we power down our engines and prepare to be boarded. Yoon looked at the faces of her crew. 60 scientists and engineers who had dedicated their lives to exploring the unknown. And then she looked at the observation deck where 40 children from a colony school trip pressed their faces against the glass to watch the alien ships. They had been on a routine mission to study a newly discovered nebula, a simple educational voyage that was supposed to show those children the wonders of the universe now. Those same children might become prisoners of a government that had declared all humans to be enemies. Power. Down the engines, Yoon ordered. And the words tasted like ash in her mouth. We cannot outrun them, and we will not risk those children's lives. The Core-3 boarding party arrived within the hour, and their commander was a tall, scaled figure named Vorith, who moved with the careful precision of a trained soldier. Captain Yoon, Vorith said as he stepped onto her bridge. By order of the Galactic Concordat, you and your crew are to be transported to a detention facility for processing. We are scientists, Yoon replied. We have done nothing wrong. That is not for me to decide, Vorith said. And she thought she heard something like regret in his voice. I have my orders. And the children. Will you put children in a detention facility? Vorith paused. And for a moment his amber eyes met hers with an expression she could not read. The children will be kept safe until arrangements can be made. Arrangements, Yoon repeated. You mean until you can figure out what to do with 40 human children, whose only crime was wanting to see the stars? The Core-3 commander had no answer for that. And his silence spoke louder than any words could have on Earth. The unified government had gathered in the deepest bunker beneath the capital, a place built to survive nuclear war and asteroid impacts, a place that had never been used until now. General Do-hwan Chai stood at the center of the chamber, surrounded by leaders from every nation on Earth, and he felt the weight of 8 billion lives pressing down on his shoulders. The situation is clear, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. The Core-3 have betrayed us. The Concordat has accepted their lies. And our people are being held across 200 worlds. How did this happen? Demanded the European delegate, a woman whose face had gone white with shock. The Core-3 were our friends. We saved their planet. We were too successful, General Chai replied. We grew too fast, became too influential. Other species started preferring human mediators and human technology and human culture. The Quarthery saw their position as the senior species threatened and decided to remove us before we could challenge them. But we never wanted to challenge them. The delegate protested. We just wanted to be part of the community. They did not see it that way. And now we must deal with the consequences of their fear. The Asian delegate leaned forward with fire in her eyes. Then we fight. We have the ships, we have the weapons. We can make them pay for what they have done, and prove every lie they told about us. General Chai replied sharply. No, we will not give them that satisfaction. We will not become the monsters they claim we are. Then, what do you propose, General? That we simply accept this betrayal. General Chai turned to face the massive screen behind him, which showed a map of all human positions throughout Concordat space. I propose we show them exactly what they have thrown away. I propose Protocol Omega. A murmur ran through the chamber, and several delegates exchanged worried glances. Protocol Omega was designed as a last resort. The African delegate said carefully, complete withdrawal from all galactic affairs. Are you certain that is necessary? They have given us no choice. They do not want us in their alliance. Very well, we will leave. But we will take everything with us. General Chai began listing what humanity would withdraw. And with each item, the faces of the delegates grew more thoughtful human. Engineers maintained the communication relays that allowed different species to talk to each other. Human doctors had developed treatments for diseases that affected a dozen worlds. Human mediators had prevented 3 wars in the last decade alone. Human trade networks moved goods between species who would never deal with each other directly. Human agricultural techniques had saved 2 planets from famine. Human scientists had mapped the safe routes through the most dangerous regions of space. We did all of this because we believed in cooperation. General Chai said, we asked for almost nothing in return except friendship and trust. And they repaid us with betrayal. What makes you think our withdrawal will matter to them? Asked the South American delegate. They seem to believe they can manage without us, because they have never had to try. For 40 years, humanity has been the glue holding their alliance together. They have grown so used to our presence that they have forgotten what it was like before we came. General Chai's voice hardened into something cold and final. Let them remember. Let them learn what it means to lose humanity. The vote was unanimous. And within hours, the order went out to every human in the galaxy: come home, bring everything. Leave nothing behind. Director Tayson Lim received the order in his office on a Concordat trading station, where he had spent 20 years building a network of human workers into critical positions throughout the galactic economy. He was not a spy in the traditional sense. He was simply a very good organizer who had placed very capable people in very important jobs. Now he began making calls, sending messages, activating protocols that had been prepared for exactly this situation. Human technicians began quietly removing themselves from communication relays, taking their expertise and leaving behind systems that no one else fully understood. Human doctors started packing their equipment and their research, preparing to leave hospitals and clinics that had come to depend on them completely. Human traders began closing their shops and canceling their contracts, withdrawing from markets that would collapse without their goods. None of this was sabotage. They left everything in working order. They trained their replacements as best they could in the short time available. They did everything possible to ensure a smooth transition, but they also knew that smooth transitions were not possible when the people leaving had never truly shared all their secrets. The galaxy would learn soon enough that humanity had been more essential than anyone had realized, and by then it would be far too late to take back what had been done. Captain Yoon watched from a detention cell as more human ships arrived to evacuate citizens from across Concordat. Space Admiral Xiao's fleet had negotiated safe passage for the evacuation. And the Concordat had agreed because they believed they were watching humanity retreat in defeat. They had no idea what was really happening. No idea that every departing human took with them knowledge and skills and connections that could never be replaced. A Corthory guard approached her cell and opened the door. "You are being released," the guard said. "Your ship will take you to the border." Yun gathered her crew and her precious cargo of children and walked toward freedom. But as she passed the Corthory commander who had captured her, she stopped. "You asked us why we are not fighting back," she said quietly. "You want to know the answer." Commander Vorath looked at her with something like curiosity. "I admit I do not understand. Humans have always been known as fierce warriors." "We are," Yun agreed. "But we are also patient. And we know that sometimes the worst thing you can do to someone who has wronged you is simply to leave them alone with the consequences of their choices." She walked past him toward her ship, and her last words hung in the air behind her. "You will understand soon enough." Ambassador Jinho Park had spent 40 years building trust between humanity and the stars. And in one morning, it all came crashing down around him. Stood in his office on the Galactic Concordat station when the first alarm rang through the halls. And for a moment he thought it was just another drill. Another routine security check that happened every few months. But then he heard the boots. Heavy boots marching in perfect rhythm down the corridor toward the human embassy. And the sound made his blood run cold because he had heard that sound before in old war videos from Earth. He moved to his desk and activated the emergency terminal, trying to reach Admiral Yuna Sion on her flagship orbiting the station. But before he could send a single word, the doors of his office exploded inward. Concordat security forces poured into the room with weapons raised, their faces hidden behind dark helmets. And Ambassador Park raised his hand slowly because he understood that one wrong move would end his life. "Ambassador Jinho Park," the lead officer said in a voice that held no emotion. "You are under arrest by order of the High Arbiter and the Concordat Council." "On what charges?" Park asked, keeping his voice calm even as his heart pounded against his ribs. "Conspiracy to commit genocide against 3 member species of the Concordat." The words hit Park like a physical blow. And for a moment, he could not speak because the accusation was so absurd that his mind refused to process it. "That is insane," he finally managed to say. "Humanity has never threatened anyone in this alliance. The evidence has been reviewed and accepted by the full council." The officer replied, "You will come with us now." Across the station, Admiral Yuna Sion watched through her flagship sensors as chaos erupted in every human section of the massive structure. Human civilians were being pulled from their homes and businesses. Families separated. Children crying as security forces herded them toward detention areas like animals. She had commanded Earth's diplomatic fleet for 15 years. And in all that time, she had never felt such rage burning in her chest. "Get me the High Arbiter," she ordered her communications officer, a young woman named Lieutenant Yunji Beek, who had gone pale at the scenes on her screen. "Admiral, they are refusing all communication from human vessels," Beek replied with a trembling voice. "Then get me anyone on that council who will answer." Sion waited as her officer tried channel after channel. But every attempt met with silence or automated rejection. And with each passing minute, more humans were dragged away on the station below. Finally, one channel opened, and the face of Counselor Vethril appeared on her screen. Vethril was Corthory, a species that looked vaguely reptilian to human eyes, with scaled skin and large amber eyes. And his people had been humanity's first and closest allies for 4 decades. "Counselor," Siong said with barely controlled fury. "What is happening down there?" "Admiral Siong," Vethril replied, and something in his voice made her stomach tighten. "I am sorry you are witnessing this, but the Council has made its decision. Decision about what? We have done nothing wrong. Evidence has been presented showing that Earth planned coordinated attacks on the homeworlds of the Drexari, the Mothan and the Yolvari, Vethrol said. The Concordat has voted to strip humanity of all diplomatic standing and detain human citizens for questioning. Evidence from whom? Siang demanded. Though somewhere deep inside she already knew the answer, Vol paused. And in that pause, she saw something that looked almost like guilt flash across his alien features. The evidence was provided by the Korthari Intelligence Service. The words hung in the air between them. And Admiral Siang felt the deck shift beneath her feet, even though the ship had not moved the Korthari, their oldest friends, their first allies. The species that had found humanity struggling to survive on their first colony, and offered them a hand up into the galactic community, the species they had fought beside in 3 wars. The species whose homeworld they had saved from an asteroid impact just 12 years ago at the cost of 400 human lives. You betrayed us, Siang whispered. We protected ourselves. Vethrol replied, and now his voice held a cold edge. Humanity was growing too powerful, too influential, too beloved by other species. We simply restored the natural order by lying, by acting first. Before you could act against us, the connection severed. And Admiral Siang stood alone on her bridge, surrounded by officers who looked at her with fear and confusion in their eyes. She thought about her options, and there were not many. Her fleet was powerful, but not powerful enough to fight the entire Concordat. And any attack would only prove the lies they had told about humanity. She thought about the 2 million human citizens scattered across Concordat space, now being rounded up like criminals. And she thought about the 40 years of friendship and service that had been thrown away in a single morning of betrayal. Admiral, Lieutenant Beak said quietly, we are receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command. Put it through. The face of General Doan Chai appeared on her screen, and she had never seen the old soldier look so tired. Admiral Siang, I assume you have been informed of the situation. I have, General. What are our orders? General Chai was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice carried a weight that seemed to press down on everyone who heard it. The Concordat has voted unanimously to condemn humanity based on fabricated evidence. 17 of our ships have been destroyed when they resisted arrest, and 23 million of our citizens are being held across 200 worlds. Sir, we have to do something. We will, General Chai replied. But not what they expect, not what they fear. He leaned closer to the camera, and his eyes burned with something that was not rage, but something deeper and more dangerous. Admiral Siang, you are to begin immediate evacuation of all human citizens from Concordat space. Use every ship at your disposal. Call in every favor we are owed. But get our people home, and then, sir, and then we leave. All of us, everywhere, we take our technology, our treaties, our aid programs, our medical teams, our trade agreements. We take everything we have given to this alliance for 40 years. And we go home. They will think we are running away, Siang said. Let them think what they want. They betrayed us, Admiral, so the order has been given. What order? Sir, General Chai's face hardened into something that would haunt her dreams for years to come. Protocol Omega. Bring our people home. Bring everything home. And when we are gone, let them see what the galaxy looks like without humanity in it. The transmission ended, and Admiral Siang stood in silence as the weight of those words settled over her protocol. Omega, she had hoped she would never hear those words spoken aloud, had prayed that the day would never come when humanity would be forced to use it, that the Korthari had made their choice. The Concordat had made their choice, and now humanity would show them all what that choice would cost. Lieutenant Beak, she said. And her voice was steady now, cold as the void between stars. Send a message to every human vessel in range. Yes, Admiral. Tell them to begin evacuation procedures immediately. We are bringing our people home. She turned to look out at the stars. Those same stars that humanity had once looked up at with wonder and hope. And tell them, she added quietly, that we will not forget what happened here today. The great engines of her flagship hummed to life. And the first chapter of humanity's exodus began.